The atmosphere inside the Oval Office reached a boiling point recently when Donald Trump found himself cornered by the persistent questioning of the media regarding his historical relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. This confrontation was sparked by the partial release of Epstein-related documents which revealed that Trump's name appeared a staggering 38,000 times within the files. While approximately 3 million documents were produced, there is a significant concern that at least another 3 million documents remain concealed by the Department of Justice. When Caitlin Collins of CNN attempted to seek clarity on these connections, the situation devolved into what witnesses described as a disastrous press conference and a personal meltdown for the former president. Instead of addressing the substance of the files, Trump pivoted to personal attacks, telling Collins that her problem was being a young woman who does not smile enough. Before we proceed with this deep dive into the disturbing details of these documents and the political fallout of this Oval Office confrontation, I would like to ask you to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you ensure that you stay informed with factual analysis and truth-driven reporting on the most critical issues facing our nation today. Your support allows us to continue providing this level of detailed investigation into the stories that the mainstream media often overlooks or fails to explain in full context. Please hit that subscribe button now and join our community of viewers who value transparency and accountability in leadership. The core of the conflict during this press event was Trump's visible agitation when pressed on why his name is so prevalent in the Epstein records. When Collins questioned him about the 38,000 mentions across 5,000 different documents, Trump's response was to label her the worst reporter and claim that her lack of a smile was proof that she was not telling the truth. This raises a significant problem. Why would a public official resort to commenting on a journalist's facial expressions when asked about serious allegations contained in legal documents? The answer, as suggested by the sources, is a calculated attempt to discredit the source of the question rather than answering the query itself. Trump further claimed that CNN has poor ratings because of individuals like Collins, despite her being noted for her tenacity during the exchange. A major theme throughout Trump's defense was his insistence that the Epstein scandal is exclusively a Democrat problem, despite his own extensive presence in the files. He argued that he has been vindicated, but this claim is contradicted by the fact that the files contain some of the most grotesque allegations imaginable involving himself and members of his former regime. He attempted to shift the focus by stating that when Epstein was alive, nobody cared about him, and now that he is dead, the interest is purely political. This leads to the question of whether the public should accept this characterization of the files as a partisan issue. The reality provided by the data is that the documents involve high-profile individuals across various sectors, and the withholding of millions of pages suggests a lack of total transparency that transcends party lines. The human cost of these documents was also brought to the forefront when Collins asked about the survivors and victims of Epstein's crimes. She pointed out that the names, images, and personal identifying information of survivors were released in what she described as an incompetent and malicious way by the regime. The problem presented here is the rate dramatization of victims due to the way the Department of Justice handled the document production. Trump's reaction to this was notably dismissive, as he claimed that the survivors must be fine because there were no major headlines suggesting otherwise. He even questioned whether the survivors felt that too much information had been released, despite reports that many are unhappy with the extensive redactions that have blacked out entire witness interviews. The scope of the Epstein files extends beyond just political figures to include prominent business leaders and international associates. Collins specifically named Elon Musk and Howard Lutnick as individuals whose names appear in the correspondence within the files. When asked if he had read these files or was aware of these connections, Trump claimed he was too busy with other tasks and suggested that if these names were truly significant, they would be dominating the headlines. This highlights a problem of accountability. If world leaders are being toppled elsewhere due to their links to this cabal, why is there such a dismissal of these names in the domestic context? Trump's response was simply to say he was sure they are fine, despite the serious nature of the associations being questioned. A striking contrast in accountability was provided by the mention of Peter Mandelson, the former United Kingdom ambassador to the United States. Mandelson was recently forced to resign from the House of Lords in the British Parliament specifically because of his links to Jeffrey Epstein. When Trump was asked for his reaction to this, especially since he had recently hosted Mandelson in the Oval Office for trade discussions, he claimed to know little about the situation. He described the resignation as too bad but did not acknowledge the difference in how the UK handles such connections compared to his own administration. This prompts the question, why is there a culture of shame and resignation in the UK for Epstein connections that is seemingly absent in the current American political discourse surrounding these files. The Oval Office discussion then shifted to Trump's claims regarding international relations, specifically his interactions with Vladimir Putin. Trump asserted that he had spoken with Putin and secured a promise for a one-week pause in attacks on Ukraine due to a severe cold wave. He claimed Putin was a man of his word and that the pause had been observed from Sunday to Sunday. However, reporters pointed out that attacks had actually resumed and were described as some of the worst yet. This presents a clear problem of veracity. When confronted with the fact that the attacks had started up again, Trump doubled down, insisting that Putin had kept his word for that specific week and that even a week of peace was something to be valued. Further analysis of Trump's statements reveals a pattern of inconsistency that the media attempted to highlight. Just 24 hours prior to his Oval Office claims, Trump had spoken about the tremendous hatred between Zelensky and Putin and described the weather in Ukraine as being colder than Canada. He used this as a justification for why he asked Putin to stop the missile strikes on Kyiv and other towns. The problem here is the discrepancy between Trump's narrative of a successful diplomatic intervention and the reality on the ground in Ukraine, where residential complexes and energy infrastructure continued to be targeted. This reinforces the perception of Trump as a leader who prioritizes his personal narrative over verifiable facts. The conversation then took a turn toward the constitutional role of the federal government in national elections. Trump expressed a desire to nationalize elections, suggesting that states are merely agents of the federal government. This statement is particularly controversial because it contradicts the traditional conservative emphasis on states' rights and the 10th Amendment. When asked what he meant by nationalizing elections, Trump argued that if a state cannot run an election honestly, the federal government should take over. He specifically targeted cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, alleging horrible corruption and rigged outcomes in the 2020 election. This proposed shift in election management raises profound legal and ethical problems. If the federal government were to take over state-run elections, it would represent a significant departure from the established system of federalism. Trump questioned why the federal government does not run them anyway, describing the current state-led processes as a disgrace. His critics argue that this reveals an authoritarian inclination, as he appears to disregard the First, Second, and Fourth Amendments when they do not suit his agenda. For instance, he has been accused of not believing in judicial warrants or protections against unreasonable searches and seizures when it comes to his political opponents. The erratic nature of the press conference was further illustrated when Trump abruptly shifted from serious political and legal matters to discussing his wife, Melania Trump. He referred to her as a movie star and mentioned a newly designated foster youth initiative included in a bill. He claimed that her documentary was the #1 documentary in 19 years and joked about what he gets out of her success. This sudden change in topic from election integrity and Epstein files to his wife's media success served as a bizarre distraction from the heavy scrutiny he was facing from the press corps. Adding another layer to the Epstein investigation, Kash Patel, a figure closely associated with the Trump administration, recently appeared on media to discuss the circumstances of Epstein's death. Patel stated that he remains 100% convinced that Epstein died by suicide in jail. This statement comes despite widespread public skepticism and the new information emerging from the recently released files. When asked if he had any regrets about how the Department of Justice handled the Epstein documents, specifically regarding the re-traumatization of survivors, Patel defended the administration's actions. He claimed that they produced the most transparent dodge and FBI history, citing the release of 3 million pages. The problem with Patel's claim of transparency is the selective nature of the document release. While 3 million pages were made public, there are still millions more that remain under protective orders and court seals. Patel argued that they produced everything they illegally could while following statutes and court orders. However, the sources suggest that the production was handled in a way that was reckless at best and malicious at worst. The lack of a human apology for the victims whose private information was exposed stands out as a significant failure in the regime's response to the scandal. One must ask why the Trump administration feels it has been more transparent than previous ones when so much information is still being withheld. Patel's response was that 3 other administrations had the opportunity to release these files but failed to do so. He maintained that the result was achieved in the right way, despite The numerous court cases and legal hurdles that slowed the process, this defense does little to satisfy those who believe that the redactions and the timing of the releases are intended to protect certain powerful individuals rather than to serve the interest of justice for the survivors. The broader political implication of this Oval Office blowup is the increasing tension between the former president and the press as more documents from his era come to light. The 38,000 mentions in the Epstein files are not just numbers. They represent a complex web of associations that continue to haunt Trump's political career. His strategy of using personal insults against reporters like Caitlin Collins may play well to his base, but it does not address the underlying legal questions posed by the data, as the truth continues to emerge through these document dumps. The pressure on the former president to provide real answers only increases. We must also consider the role of misinformation in these discussions. Trump's claims about Putin's ceasefire and the alleged corruption in Detroit and Philadelphia are often presented without evidence that stands up to judicial or journalistic scrutiny. By framing these issues as conspiracies against him, he creates a narrative where he is the victim rather than the survivors of the crimes detailed in the Epstein files. This inversion of victimhood is a powerful political tool, but it relies on the public ignoring the actual data contained within the millions of pages of documents. As we conclude this analysis, it is clear that the events in the Oval Office were a microcosm of the larger battle for truth in contemporary politics. The Epstein files, the claims of election rigging, and the shifting narratives on international diplomacy all point to a leadership style that prioritizes personal loyalty and public image over constitutional norms and factual accuracy. The 38,000 mentions of Donald Trump in the Epstein documents remain a factual anchor that no amount of deflection or personal attacks on journalists can fully displace. The public deserves a full accounting of what is contained in the remaining concealed documents to ensure that justice is finally served for the survivors of these horrific crimes. The importance of independent analysis in these times cannot be overstated, as the complexity of these legal filings and the intensity of the political rhetoric can often obscure the simple truth. We have seen how the former president uses his platform to distract and disparage, yet the persistence of reporters like Caitlin Collins ensures that these critical questions remain in the public consciousness. It is through this constant pressure and the careful examination of the data that we can hope to see a more transparent and accountable government in the future. The Epstein files are a dark chapter in history, and the full disclosure of their contents is necessary for the country to truly move on, as Trump ironically suggested it should. Thank you for staying with us through this extensive political analysis of Trump's Oval Office reaction to the Epstein files. If you found this explanation helpful and want to see more content that dives deep into the data and the truth behind the headlines, please subscribe to our channel. Your subscription is vital for us to continue this work and to reach more people with the facts that matter. We are committed to bringing you the most accurate and well-researched information available. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and we will see you in the next video as we continue to seek the truth together. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.